Hi, thank you guys again for all coming in. Like Becca said, my name is Ernie. I'm our head performance coach here. I've also worked as a strength and conditioning coach here for a few different high schools in the state of Arizona. So like we said, we're really going to be talking about how we integrate performance training for the high school athlete, both from a private sector wise, but also at the high school level. So the biggest thing we obviously know about the high school athlete is they're typically now over specialized, underdeveloped, and then they lack quality resources when it comes to training, recovery, and nutrition. You see that a lot of days, especially with basketball, baseball. You have athletes who are 12, 13 getting asked to specialize, play one sport only at that age. We see a lot of lack of athletic development with those athletes. So with that, I like to typically focus on 5 core pillars in our performance training that allow us to add to their development and try to break away from that over specialization we see in their sports now with the high school athlete. So the 5 core pillars I like to utilize are typically our prep work, our warm-up, skill development, strength, and then our conditioning. With that, starting obviously as our prep work as we go through, is typically how we lay the groundwork for a session. In prep work, we'll see different things like soft tissue, active mobility, different types of activation exercise. We like to lay the setting to make sure we have a successful session with that. Now, biggest things when it comes from a consideration standpoint, when you're at the private sector, you have a facility like we have, typically you can work with as many athletes as you have the equipment, you have your hands and your ability to do what you like to do. At the high school setting, I'm not sure if any of us are athletic trainers or professionals who work with high school athletes. Each high school is a little different. You might have a weight room, which is like a college facility, then you might have a weight room, which is one rack, one bathroom, and no bands. So knowing that you have to work with what you have from an equipment standpoint and a flow, especially because if I have a group of, let's say the baseball team, 13, 14 athletes, I can get a lot more efficient versus if I have the football team, which is 75 kids, how can I properly set them up for a prep work session and get that going? So kind of starting things off, if you guys want to put the coffees down, I want us to jump right into a breakout session to get moving, to get started today. Break us into about groups of 3 to 5. So I have right back there, lacrosse balls and bands. So ideally what I like to see is about 3 rounds of going through, just lacrosse ball, the calf, kind of prepping up for some plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So just going through of different pumps with the foot as we are lacrosse balling, and as well as a banded ankle dorsiflexion mobilization with a partner pulling us from behind. So if you guys want to partner up and turn around right there, there is lacrosse balls and bands right behind us, kind of diving in. I'm going to grab Nate. He's going to be my partner. We're going to kind of show you what we're looking at and what we want to go through, and then go through 3 to 4 rounds as partners as we go. Hope that felt good for some of us. Some of us, I hope it wasn't too tight. From a standpoint with that, ideally, I don't want that to take too much time out of our session, especially when we think if we only get an athlete for an hour, maybe an hour and a half of performance training session, our prep work should ideally be that first 5, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So being very efficient with your setup, your equipment, and being ready to roll through that will really help you guys when it comes to implementing performance training for the high school athlete. From there, we'll go into the warm-up. Now with the warm-up, I typically use a very set warm-up depending on what my skill session is of that day. If I have a linear-based speed session, my warm-up is prepping that athlete for linear speed. Not just a typical warm-up, just getting the body warmed up. So usually I follow these kind of protocols. I'll do some type of general movement to elevate the heart rate, increase body core temperature, then hip activation, dynamic flexibility, then I'll get in some specific drill work to lay the groundwork. So if I'm going through acceleration, I'm gonna start doing specific drills, whether it's my A skips, pop float skips, power skips, different things from a standpoint that helps the athlete get ready for that skill development session they're gonna have later on. I'll CNS preparation. Biggest thing that I consider here is your area. So are you getting warmed up in the weight room? Are you getting warmed up in the gym? Or are you getting warmed up out in the field? And knowing how you have to space your athletes to have an efficient warm up. Because let's say if you're in the weight room with a 30-person group, you can't just have a bunch of lines. Your weight room is going to be super crowded. Versus you're out on the field, you can line up and you can efficiently flow and move throughout that session to make sure you're not getting caught up too much on time. Again, duration of the warm-up. You don't want to lose 25, 30% of your performance training session just in that first half. So being very efficient as you choose your certain warm-up exercises and as we flow through. Now, as we go kind of diving into our warm-up session, I want everyone to think that we're prepping from a linear-based speed or an acceleration training session. So with that in mind, obviously we're trying to cue hip extension, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and a knee drive as we prep. So when we get in this warm-up, how I want it to look is 5 lines on that back of the weight or of our turf section, and then we're going to go through my typical warm-up of what I would have an athlete go through if we were going to be doing an acceleration-based training session. I guess a little tougher than what I had planned for you guys, so everyone should feel very warm, maybe a little sweaty as we go through. Right after we go from that warm-up process, obviously we utilize a water break, especially here in the Arizona sun. If we're out in the field, you have to be very, very cognizant about what temperature is, what temperature the field is, and going through. But from there, we go into a skill development session. So with skill development, Here, we're looking to improve movement efficiency. We know with sports, it's not just lifting. I don't care if they're getting a bigger back squat. To get a bigger back squat, I want them to move better and feel better. So when it comes to skill development, this can include acceleration, top end speed, change direction, agility, plyometrics, med ball power. And this is typically what we want a big part of our performance training to focus on, because we want our athletes to move better. So ideally, if you just make them stronger, more powerful, but it doesn't improve to their movement efficiency going up, we don't necessarily do them justice at that level. Now, with this consideration, it's your time of year. If we're in season, post-season, going through, what type of skill session we're going to utilize and how intense we're going to be with that skill session. Equipment. Now, like we said, if you're here, you have your run rockets, you have your sleds, you have different aspects of what you can use. But a lot of our high schools, if we are high school employees here, you might have nothing. You might just have your field. You might just have your bleachers. You might have to be a little bit more imaginative with how you're going to make that process work and go through. Training age, just like we saw in the warm-up process. What you choose, usually you want it to be able to work for your higher level athletes and for your lower level athletes. So knowing if you choose too advanced of a skill or too advanced of a drill for a specific skill training session that you're looking to get from, you might not get the benefit from one athlete as you're looking from the other athlete, as we saw with the bounding in our warm-up. Difficulty of the task/drills, like we talked about, if they're too difficult or maybe too, especially at the high school level, too complicated, and you lose out on so much time having to explain, having the demo, having the cue, and you lose out on a big 15, 10-minute chunk of your session, now you have to take that away from somewhere else throughout that performance training session. So with that, like I said, we are prepping ourselves for an acceleration-based session. A big thing that I utilize with the high school, especially at the high school, that I get to implement some performance training at, is a circuit-based performance training session. We can move efficiently here. We can get through a lot more volume than we can if we're all locked in on one base movement. And I like to make sure we're paired up. So today, we're going to go through, like I said, acceleration-based training session. We're going to have 3 different stations. Nate set this all up for us. We're going to go through hurdle jumps. I'm going to split us up into 3 different groups, and we're going to think 3 rounds through each type of skill-based development sessions we're going to go through. On the hurdle jumps, we're going to go non-continuous, continuous, and double contact. So obviously we know the difference there. A hurdle jump, meaning you're jumping off 2 feet, you're landing on 2 feet, different from a hop, which is a single leg jump as we're going through. When we're coaching and cueing, I'm looking for a powerful jump, quick ground contact, and trying to be as explosive as possible. You might not even have hurdles at the facility or at your high school you're working with. Even give them an object, a line, anything like that, and tell your athletes your goal is still to jump as high as possible. It doesn't necessarily need to be just over your 6-inch hurdle, just knowing that you want them to be as explosive as possible as you go through. From there, we're going to our acceleration station. We're looking half kneeling starts. Again, here, we're looking for the body to stay in that horizontal position, triple extension from that push leg, and an explosive knee drive from that drive leg as we're coming through. Again, I am going to demo and cue all of this as we go through if some of us don't know exactly what we're looking like. And then our med ball station, rotational med ball throws, especially if you have a big brick wall at your facility or something that you can throw into. Your ability to be efficient, station off, and not lose reps or time because of the size of the group you have is huge when you're coming from a high school performance standpoint. So again, that skill development and enhancing movement efficiency is one of the biggest things we want to do, especially at the high school level. You have basketball athletes that have been over-specialized, only been on the court for 13 years and haven't actually opened up into full sprints, never trained throughout that. So knowing that you're going to see a lot different skill levels, but your ability to enhance their movement efficiency is really going to add their longevity and their performance at their sport. From there, we go into what I find typically a lot of the most fun part when it comes to the high school performance training session for a lot of the high school athletes is their strength or their weight room training session. Now, with the weight room training session, biggest thing we're looking at, obviously, here is training age. You're going to have 14-year-olds, maybe 18-year-olds, and looking how you can properly coordinate between the two and having good modifications from one exercise to the other. Biggest thing here is that we want to build strong, powerful, and resilient athletes. Again, like we talked about before, back squat numbers can go up, but if back squat numbers go up and our speed or movement doesn't go up alongside of it, we're not properly doing them justice when it comes to that. So knowing that the weight room is a means to an end to enhance performance on the field, it's not a means to an end just to get stronger when it comes into the weight room. So when it comes to that, your weight room session can include a lot of things. These are just a few things that I put on the board that we include. It can be Olympic weightlifting, power-based movements, bilateral and unilateral. We want pushes, pulls, carries, rotational movements. We want to go through all planes of motion, especially with a lot of our athletes who get so caught in one plane. We want to make sure we really do them justice, hit everything. We want to add in tempo, especially at that high school level, making sure we get a lot of control, a lot of eccentric strength coming through. And we want to make sure we can add a lot of active mobility in here. I'm sure all of us who have worked with our high school athlete, they aren't the best when it comes to mobilizing, stretching, anything of that. So your ability to add in active mobility in their strength session not only can help you from a circuit and a coordination and flow standpoint, but also you do them justice by making sure we check those boxes that you know they're not going to check on their own, no matter how much you tell them to, no matter how much they say they are going to, or if they actually did. Now, considerations with this is training age. Like we talked about before, if you're working with football, you're going to have the senior who's going D1, and you're going to have a 13, 14-year-old who's coming out of 8th grade and has never seen a weight before from that standpoint. So with training age, you want to make sure that you choose movements that you can modify efficiently, and then you can coach and cue efficiently. You have one athlete doing something and one athlete doing something else. Your ability to flow and move from athlete to athlete, make sure your coordinator there is huge. Athlete buy-in, making sure your athletes are bought in, you're making it fun, especially when you have athletes who go in the weight room and they kind of go through the motions and going through. Obviously then you're not getting justice or actual real work out of those athletes. So making it fun, engaging for the athletes is huge as we go through. Equipment inside the weight room. If you only have a 3-rack weight room, you can't necessarily expect to go through 10 people at each rack, each group. So you have to make sure you have your coordination or your training session spaced out to make sure you can efficiently flow throughout that. But some of you guys might have access to a 20-rack weight room, and where you're like, oh, every athlete can have their own rack moving through the entire time. Some of us are more fortunate than others when it comes to that. The size of the team you're working with, form requirements, time of year is huge, especially obviously if we know if we're in season, we don't want to be a super heavy eccentric loads on our athlete or super heavy in terms of volume going through. So knowing what type of movements, what you're using, what you're choosing for that athlete during that weight training session to adjust. Now from there, we're going to go into a kind of demo block of how I coordinate and utilize our weight room with any type of athlete-based training group. Now here, we're going to talk through it first. I will demo and we'll go through everything in the weight room before we split up into 3 different groups as we go. But like we said, our first block is always that most powerful or demanding base block. So that is typically where I like to add in a lot of our Olympic-based lifting, especially at the high school level. Olympic lifting is huge from a standpoint to build coordination as well as building power. But again, not necessarily if you think we don't want to regress an athlete who can't figure out the form, if you can modify and go from there. So that first movement I chose our hang power clean, but today we're going to go through 3 different variations. We're either going to have the hang power clean, we might have the hang high pull, or your hang jump shrug as we go through. Again, your ability to coordinate those athletes that don't necessarily have the form, but you don't want a loss of speed or power development. How can you modify the movement to ensure you're still getting one thing out of one athlete the same as the other in terms of that form, that training age that we're working with. Movement 2 we'll go through is a little depth drop action. So adding in a little bit more plyometric, and then again, working through to where we can efficiently roll through our weight room without losing speed or losing time, because every athlete is waiting and rolling through nice and slow. And in our active mobility, we'll utilize a prayer stretch as well. A prayer stretch is great to pair with that hang clean because obviously we can increase that elbow flexion position, usually add a lot more catch position or a safer catch when we come up with a barbell. Now here we'll hit each movement as we go. Block 2, we'll go through a little front squat with tempo, a bird dog row with a pause, and another active mobility movement or half kneeling stretch. And block 3, we'll get a lot into our unilateral based movement, some frontal plane action, a lot of our twists, and a lot of our carry movements that we're going to add in throughout there. We're only going to have 2 rounds for each block. Again, I don't want you guys thinking right here you're actually getting your workout in. You're just feeling how the flow goes through. So just enough weight to move through that movement and kind of roll through a weight training session that we would implement for the high school athlete. Last little piece, and a piece that sometimes get neglected, especially if we have our athletes at private sector, is their conditioning or their energy system development that we utilize with our athletes. Biggest thing I've seen, this is a portion that I think nobody likes the most, and we're not going to do a breakout session for this portion, obviously, because I'm not just going to make you guys condition, finish it out, and then you guys be too tired to ask any questions if you have them, but actually that's a good idea. So as it goes, the biggest thing we're thinking about, we want to build the energy systems that are used in the athlete sport. Again, if it's football, it's more of that phosphagen-driven sport. I don't need my athlete going 4 times a week, jogging for 5 miles as we go, if that makes sense. So we want to utilize and focus, especially when we're limited on our training sessions, on what matters the most for that athlete. And that's the biggest thing we're going through. But then we also want to think about load management and then what time of year it is. Let's say if it's soccer, we are in season. Are they getting a lot of their conditioning energy system development in practice? Probably yes. Is that something now I need to focus on as much throughout their actual training session? Probably not as much. Or if I can even regress and choose a different type of energy system that they're not checking the box with as much going through. So obviously with conditioning, biggest thing is very easy and simple when you think of it from that standpoint. You're waiting to the end, not trying to tire them out from a standpoint, but knowing what type of athlete you're working with, who and what type of season that we're in, and going through. A somewhat type of football conditioning session that I'll utilize here. Again, we're not going to do this one going through unless you guys really want to. Hands up. No one, not a soul. But going through is time constraints is the biggest thing we're adding, because a lot of times, especially with our high school level athlete, if we don't give them a time that they necessarily have to make it in, we're not going to get not only a good enough buy-in, but also a high enough intensity level for us to develop that conditioning system. Because if I just tell them I want them running 40 yards, I have my high school tackle that took 35 seconds to run 40 yards. I'm not going to say I haven't seen that before at the high school training level with the different training ages that we have. We're going through. So making sure that we give them time constraints. We're very specific about what we're looking for, but we're also now a big thing we see, especially with our sport coaches that we probably work with. What happens typically if we have a bad practice is they run and they drill them in the grass. So making sure, one, you're communicating with that sport coach of what the conditioning needs to be, why we're doing it, and then how you can manage that and what you can modify to if that's something that a sport coach continually goes to towards the end of the session, and now your athlete is more prone to get injured just from a total load volume going through. Does that make sense? Cool. Again, unless you want to, no hands, none. I didn't think so. We won't go through that. I want to ask any questions that we have, anything we've gone through today. Thank you guys again, obviously, for sitting all the way through. And thank you, Becca, for having everybody here today to go through nice and smooth. Thank you guys so much for watching. You missed a whole bunch on the drills, exercises, and movements we utilize with our high school performance training. If you guys want to learn more, please reach out below and stay tuned for our next sports medicine seminar. Thank you guys again.